Video? Maybe, I don't know. It's been a while since I've actually really used this channel in anger or in a regular basis at all. And I think mainly that's because I've been on placement. I've been so busy last year. For those of you who don't know, for those of you who are here casually clicking because you might have seen a nice thumbnail or you saw an interesting title, my name's Jonathan. I am a computer networks and security student here at Staffordshire University, and last year I was on placement with Amazon Web Services as a network support engineer in the IS internet border space. So any connection into and out of Amazon went through a device that I looked after alongside the rest of the team there. So there was a bit, just a tiny bit of pressure there, but it was a fantastic year, I think. But it was incredibly stressful, and incredibly, it had a huge amount of pressure, obviously added on there because, as I said, the nature of the work. Like, I was one of 30 in my team across the whole world that are managing those devices, and if something goes wrong with them, someone somewhere can't access Amazon potentially, which is a huge pressure on your shoulders when you're only, 20, 21. So it was interesting. It was a good year. I've learned a lot. I've definitely grown as a person, really put into perspective how much I know, how much I don't know, which is a good thing because, like, otherwise I would have got very complacent in this final year to say, I know a reasonable amount. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm still probably going to be slightly complacent because I already have a job offer from Amazon. I'm incredibly lucky that my placement has gone incredibly well this year. But I think it was a good experience because I've came back from Dublin. It was incredibly lonely, I'm not going to lie. I didn't, because of my personality, go and see one of the other videos somewhere where I talk about my mental health. But I am terrible at making friends, which is shit for someone who moves to a different country with no one around them. So, what can I say? But it was fantastic. I met a lot of new people. I met a lot of fantastic people, work-wise anyway. Like, as I said, friendship-wise and, socializing and all that kind of stuff. Like, I had zero interaction with people. That isn't zero, but you know what I mean. It is zero to a certain degree. But it was okay. I enjoyed last year. It was stressful, but it was fun. And like, a lot of the work that I was doing was something that a full-time engineer would do. And I think that's why I surprised so many people, because I did so well. I handled the pressure. I kept up with the rest of the team. Obviously, everyone in the team has their own specialities and skills. Mine, realistically, was the passion and drive to actually get things done, which is interesting. I like the job, so who knows, I might find myself there next year, maybe, who knows. But for any of those of you thinking of doing a placement, because this video I wanted to be about placements. If any of you are thinking about doing placements, you're probably in some form of a degree, most likely technical, maybe artistical, whatever, theory-wise. I don't know the classifications of degrees, so sue me. But I would definitely recommend them. As long as you can find a paid placement, because the worst thing that you could do is go out into industry. Well, no, I wouldn't say that's the worst thing that you could do, but it would certainly cripple you slightly to go out onto placement with an unpaid placement and work there for a year. Because let's say you get a placement down in London. London is notorious for being incredibly expensive. The same with Dublin. It was incredibly expensive. And you don't want to have to rely on family, friends, loans to get you through that year of incredibly high expense, whether that be travel, whether that be rent, whether that be food. You've still got all of that on your plate, which is quite stressful if you're not going to have any regular income. So if you guys can find paid placements, that's even better, because it means then that you don't have to stress out too much about money. Like, I've came back from Dublin with quite a substantial amount that I'm now saving ready for when I potentially move back there or move wherever, so then I don't have to worry about having to pay up front like $5,000 for rent and new stuff and furniture and all that kind of bullshit. It just means that I just have to worry about finding a place, and I just have to worry about finding a job potentially. But as I said, a placement has secured me a position back at Amazon, which yet again is a huge positive for placements. It gives you effectively a year's opportunity, a year long, or 6 months, or 3 months, depending on when you do your placement, but it gives you that period of time length of an interview effectively with the company. So they get to know you, they get to see what you're like, they get to understand how you work and if you fit into the company. And if you do, then that means that you've got a chance to potentially go back there, which is fantastic. It means that when you go into your final year, you don't have to worry too much about contacting companies, going for interviews, worrying about all that while you're worrying about your final year project, your dissertations, everything. It's a slightly relieving thing to think about. Obviously, as I mentioned, placements come with a bit of stress. Obviously, you're doing a full-time job. Obviously, they wouldn't expect you to work to the same kind of level as a full-time engineer, but if you could, brownie points and all that, it gives you more chance of obviously getting a offer to come back and work for the company that you were working with. But obviously at the same time, don't forget that you're still there to do work. You're still going to have a level of pressure. So that's the only thing that I would mention. Like if you're not too great with like meeting your assignment deadlines, for example, and you find it really difficult if you're given like a 1,000-word essay, maybe go into it with like a bit of a like hesitation. Try and find somewhere that wouldn't have too higher expectations of their interns. I know that sounds incredibly harsh, but like at the same time, the company is going to be expecting things from you. And if you know that you can't deal with the stress and things like that yet, it would be best to go into more of a very relaxed kind of situation where maybe you're taught or you're trained into the job, rather than expected to, from a month or two in, to go ahead and work as a full-time engineer, for example. I think that's the only thing to take into consideration. Other than that, as I said, sometimes it gets a bit lonely. Like, you might move to a completely different country. Like, I know I moved to Ireland, Dublin. I know a friend who moved to Brussels, I believe. And I know he had a very hard time trying to, fit in, get along, actually feel like he belongs there. And it caused him some issues. And at one point he was very close to actually coming back because it was all a bit too much for him. Thankfully he stuck it through and he's going to be finishing soon. But that's one thing to take into consideration. Like, think, would you be okay completely moving away from family, friends, and effectively starting afresh? It's very much similar to literally moving away for university, but it's slightly different, I guess. But yeah, that's my take on placements. Like, they are fantastic. If you can get one, go for it. The only downside to them is that it can get stressful. It can get kind of full of pressure, and it can get kind of lonely, depending on your personality, obviously. If you're great with making friends other than work colleagues, then you'll be perfectly fine, obviously. Or if it's local to where you've been going for university, then you'll be perfectly fine. But if you're not great at that kind of stuff, then it can get quite difficult. Like, as I said, myself, I found that quite difficult myself. But there are ways of coping with it. As I said, go and check out the other video that I've mentioned, and that tells you all about how I kind of tells you slightly how I dealt with it. I'm not going to tell everything because that's probably a bit too much for me to share online, but there's definitely coping mechanisms there if you don't make too many friends if you like to keep yourself to yourself, but you're starting to feel lonely because you don't have any of your regular friends there or your family. And I think the only other thing to mention is that obviously when you go on a placement, you put your studies on hold by a year. So you've got to take into that consideration that all of your friends, when you go back to university, might not be there. Like, I'm going into that situation where I would say close to about 80% of my friends that I knew from second year might not be there next year, which is quite difficult. It's quite difficult to deal with because it means then you've got to go through a whole year of not knowing that many people, unless you can get yourself out and you can actually make friends easily. For me, that's not too easy, realistically. It's easier said than done. Hopefully I'm going to fix that this year, but who knows? Knowing my procrastination nature, I might not, but anyway, I think that's about it. I hope you guys really consider placements. They are a great opportunity, and if you have any questions about them or what I did last year, then please feel free to leave them down in the comments below, or message me on Twitter, or tweet me, whatever. Details are below. Go and check them out. I don't care. Whatever. Bye.